This is the Elevated Grapes Podcast.
Elevated Grapes Podcast.
With your host, Sethi.
Your host, Sethi.
And Stylist Rashi Bindra.
It's time to get started.
Let's talk fashion, shall we?
Okay.
Kafuffle ready.
Okay, minions, let's go.
All right, welcome to Elevated Grapes. I am your host, Sethi.
I'm Stylist Rashi Bindra.
I told you 1-2 punch. We got this thing down now.
Oh yes, I think we do.
Yeah, there
or
we go.
I'm just very happy today, that's all.
You're extremely happy today. Well, given your stressful day, I don't know how you're happy right now because you've been running around like a maniac all day.
Because we have an amazing guest who I have a professional crush on, that's why.
What does that actually mean?
Hey, what is a professional crush?
Me?
Now you gotta define this.
Yes, I want to know.
So it means you have a crush on the person and their achievements, but in that role model type way. It's
Awesome.
like, I want to be able to work with this person, or I want to be able to get to their level. Like, I want respect for them. That's what I mean.
So you gave role model.
Appreciate
street
it.
slang.
Thank you.
I get it.
You give the word role model street slang. Professional crush.
I'm rational.
I like it.
that.
It's a new
There you
term.
go.
We should Urban Dictionary it.
Let's
Oh my
do
god, I
it.
have tons of professional crushes. It's awesome.
There you go.
It gets you motivated.
Exactly. Some people call them mentors.
I
Yeah.
just
Some people call them
crushes.
role models.
Or prof crush. Hashtag prof crush.
Hashtag prof crush.
Yeah.
You got that?
Got it.
Hashtag prof crush.
There you go.
So we have Umbereen on the show today, and Umbereen has an amazing resume, and I'm not going to go through all of it. Yeah, portfolio is a better word. This is why she's about the words, like the words that we're supposed to use online. Prof crush.
Prof crush.
Portfolio.
I feel like I'm your prof.
Yeah, I know. No, she's your professor in university.
That's kind of
She's
hot.
going to take us a class right now anyway, so it's all good. She's going to take us a class. So Sabrina has an amazing portfolio of work. She's an artist, both in Toronto and internationally, very well known. And we're very lucky to have her. So thank you for being on the show. And thank you for opening up your space to allow us to record.
My pleasure.
Beautiful.
She's so kind about it. It's a gorgeous spot. And, you know, I might bug her afterwards and be like, hey, you know what? Your place is really nice. I kind of want to do all my shows there. So
You actually can if you want.
So, you know,
Yeah.
I might book out a couple of days and rent out the space. Just bring people in and record.
You can totally do it.
So am I allowed, like, how much detail am I allowed to give in terms of the kind of work you've done and who you've worked with?
Everything. I'm pretty
So
open.
It's open format in terms of who you worked with.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna get into a lot of the different types of folks and artists that she's worked with, but Umbereen's portfolio includes work with Quest, it includes work with Director X, and it includes work with Toronto's Drake. So it's across the board in terms of the type of people that she's worked with, and we're gonna get into some of the other folks. Those are the ones that you and I have talked about. But there's a whole array of different areas of focus and artists and just even types of shows that you worked on, and not just with artists but shows like actual art shows around the world. So we're going to get into that, and it's just like I said, it means a lot for us to have you here to talk about that. And we want to get into your inspirations, how you built this, what drives you, why you do this, and then because our talk show is a bit more focused on fashion, we're going to talk about some of the similarities in our world versus your world, because there's a lot of parallels in there that we all have to follow to help our branding and kind of grow our business. So we're going to get into a little bit of that. So let's start right at the beginning. Why art? Because and I want to say one more thing. I'm taking up a lot of time here.
Yes, you are.
Most artists have, they take a blank canvas and they work off a blank canvas. Umbereen doesn't really have her canvas is her mind. Like there's no like a piece of paper in front of her and she's like, okay, what am I going to draw on here? Which is a challenge on its own. But she takes literally nothing and builds it into something, right? So
which I can understand, and
yeah, like it's really cool. So I wanted to, and we'll give context to that because it's quite abstract the way we just put it in, but we're going to get into. So tell us a little bit about your upbringing and how you got into the world of art and what you do.
yeah.
Okay, so growing up, I grew up in Scarborough, Shout out to
Scarborough ting.
Scarborough.
Scarborough
Yes,
ting.
always. And my parents, like, my dad was an artist. So I grew up watching him take photos, takes these beautiful photographer, draw, paint, calligraphy. But like an immigrant family, he had to work in a factory, so he didn't get to practice his work.
So he was an artist.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. He taught art in Pakistan as well. And my great grandfather he wrote the national anthem of Pakistan. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah. So,
It's come a long history of art in the family.
like poetry. So it was always around, and it was like a luxurious thing to do at home, and there was a lot of music in the house because, a lot of baja playing, and the uncles would come over and aunts, and it was like music and art and films got you to sort of have your own little world, so
Right.
they would go and work, and, when you're an immigrant, you live in kind of like a fragmented society because people don't know who you really are. You're still struggling. And I remember growing up and being in our apartment in Tuxedo Court with all our aunts and uncles and singing and music, and all of that was just our way of escaping, and it was our culture, how to bring culture to the forefront. So growing up in that was my normal. And then basically I became a social worker. And that's because, like a lot of brown kids, I was bullied. And I wanted to help people because a social worker is who helped me. So when I was a kid, I was totally different. I have a Muslim name. My dad's Muslim. My mom's Christian. But my mom insisted that I went to a Catholic school. But I'm not Catholic. My mom was very stubborn like me. So she insisted that we stayed Christian and not conform. So I was always that kid who wasn't allowed to participate in like communion and like, things that other Catholic kids did. And I had a different name and I was a different skin color and all the things. My grandfather used to walk me to school and we used to have like rotis for lunch. So it's like the formula for the best picking on ever.
You were ready to get bullied.
Totally.
We all know.
Yeah, we all know what that's like. Yeah. So I was lucky enough to meet this woman and she changed my life. She was like, you are dealing with racism because you're different and people are scared of that. And I was like, oh, I really like people that are different, and growing up, I've always had a propensity to be attracted to people who are different, think differently, act differently. And as I see now, those people actually have changed the entire world.
Incredible, correct.
And so I made a promise to myself that that's what I was going to do. And I remember when I was like 12 years old.
How old were you at this time?
Oh yeah, like 9 or 10. And I wrote a play about racism when I was 12 years old. I convinced my teacher to allow me to write this play, and I convinced him to film it. And I like casted everybody when I was really young because I thought to myself, well, maybe if I tell a story about what I'm feeling, other people will be able to understand it. Yeah, and so
you wrote your first film at 12.
Play, yeah, it was like, yeah, it was all
and
about.
Produced it.
Yeah, I convinced them to film it, Mr. Nash, and then I got put into.
I love it.
Shout out, Mr. Nash.
Shout out, Mr. Nash, and then I got put into this leadership circle, and I ended up inspiring other people that were different, and we just used to meet like I don't know once a week or something to talk about how you can use music and art to challenge differences, and then I just fulfilled that promise. Like I went to university and I went to Western because it was like the furthest thing from home. And I just wanted to be away. But I was different there too. I was a brown girl from Scarborough and Western was not that,
Right.
And I clung to people in the arts.
Western had Western culture show.
Yes. I mean, I loved the desi side of it, but I wasn't typical. Like,
right, no, of course.
I have a degree in women's studies. I was very much interested in storytelling and truth telling.
Yes. I like that, truth telling.
Truth telling and cultural anthropology because I had gone through so much racism. I loved learning about other cultures. And I really was fascinated by Orientalism and colonialism and how these North American perspectives have, enslaved people and where this whole concept of other comes from. Like I really wanted to dig deep. And I found the people in those classes were very creative. They're alternative thinkers. They're philosophers. And I was just attracted to that. And I would say I was different even at Western. So I got into theater. So
let me ask you a question. Like you specifically chose a path that took you down. You went into theater, you went into arts, you did like cultural studies. Do you find that these sort of subjects and topics are not readily sort of pushed or given to kids like to access? Because I mean, you chose to do that, but had you not had that interest, had you not gone in and explored it, you may have not have learned about these things or been able to access it so easily because you showed that initiative to do it, but not everybody thinks that way or thinks, oh, like let me look at this.
I mean, absolutely, especially in our culture.
Well, yeah, right, and I think what amazing about your story is that you were aware of what was going on. You were aware that you were different, and you were aware that you were facing racism. And the reason I was smiling a little bit when you were telling your story is that I went through something very similar back in Montreal, but there I didn't have someone to tell me you are going through this. I didn't have anyone to help me understand why I never felt like I'm out of place, even though I was trying my hand in everything, like especially like writing and arts and social studies and all of those things. I just didn't have that link. So then I spent a huge amount of time trying to fit in, which I still never did. So it's very inspiring to hear that because of that one person that helped you be aware of what you were going through, you managed to pave this path, and not a lot of people are very lucky that way, right? So it's a cool thing.
Yeah, I mean that it was that social worker who
changed your life.
Yeah, she changed my life.
Helped you want to change other people's lives, right?
That's what happened.
So then you were in Western and you took theater.
Yeah, I actually read the book The Vagina Monologues. Fantastic. And I don't know if you know the book.
I do.
Eve Ensler. I was just so floored by it. I was like, oh my God, this is a story about women, and they're talking about things that we don't talk about. Because in our culture, yes, you talk about them, but you talk about them behind closed doors. Yes. Right? Like I used to hear my mom on the phone, and the aunts would, huddle in the kitchen, and they would talk. I
didn't hear any of that.
Yeah. I mean, I was just very, very perceptive, but there was talk in our culture. It's just done differently. Yeah. There's a huge support system.
Yeah, it's very under
yes,
very faux pas.
Totally. So when it was out in the open, when I read this book, I was like, this is fantastic. And Eve Ensler actually interviewed women of different cultures, cultural backgrounds. So you would get a Sudanese woman's voice, an elderly, Jewish woman's voice. So I read it, and I think I Googled it or something, and it said that the University of Western was doing a show. So I auditioned for it, and I got in.
Oh, wow.
And so I performed in it for 3-4 years. And then after that,
This was during school.
Yeah. I was in the freak show. I mean, I loved it. I met other women that were incredible. I was definitely the only brown person there in my entire undergraduate degree. There was no brown people in women's studies. There was no brown people in cultural anthropology. There was no brown people in theater. So I was always alone. But I just found comfort in identifying with people who I felt were very worldly. I could learn from them. And a lot of them were international students. A lot of them just came from different walks of life, and it fed my soul. Yeah. And so after that, I graduated and went home, and I was so confused. I was like, I don't know what I want to do in my life. So I started workshopping different careers. I pretended I was a doctor one day, and I would literally pretend like I was a doctor, and I would look up, okay, this is what you need to be a doctor. And I was like, yeah, no. Then it would be I'm a nurse, because my mom was a nurse, and I would just die at the sight of blood. No, I thought, what if I'm a teacher? And I would literally spend the entire day pretending like I was a teacher.
So this would be at home, or
yeah.
Okay.
So as when you transition from school, you feel lost. Absolutely. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to work at the ROM. And then I would go to their staff, I would read their bios, and I would look up all their credentials. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, I want to do a little bit of everything. I don't want to just be a doctor, a teacher, a this, a that. And I remember I was in Indigo or Chapters at the time, and I was flipping through bios of chefs. And I love that chefs were as an author, designer, and chef, and this and that, because chefs really inspire me. Right. And I was like, this is what I want. And I remember doing a quiz on monster.ca, and I didn't fit into any of the boxes. They're like, you are suited for an alternative career. We don't know what that is.
You were suited for nothing.
I did not. Nothing.
What do I do with my life?
So literally it was trial and error. I was like, okay, I want to be part of culture. So I started volunteering places at Harbourfront Center, for example.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I just showed up. I was like, okay, I'll do whatever you want. So I volunteered at this milk festival, and I just did the best that I could. And there was an internship there, and I did that. I did any fundraiser I could get involved in, but that was me as a kid. 12 years old, I was in the Scarborough Mirror doing some pancake breakfasts. In high school, I got my own internships.
How were the pancakes?
They're amazing. In high school, I remember I was such a rebel. I didn't want what they gave me. I found my own internships. I got one at the Toronto Rape Crisis Center. I just called them up and I was like, I want to do an internship. And I was sitting in like Jane Doe trials when I was 18 years old.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And because I was like, I was just in a different lane, I guess. And I think I remember I was learning about Deepak Chopra too when I was very young. So when I left school, I just started volunteering everywhere, and I actually applied to get into my master's in anthropology, and I got in. And you got to remember, I'm not an academic whatsoever. I cannot write an academic paper. What I can do is write creative things. So anthropology and women's studies gave me that outlet, because I tried psychology just to say, like, that didn't work. I loved psych, but I didn't like how everything came from like a sort of like more of a clinical background, where I was more interested in socio-cultural, political, environmental, like, what's your story? These are all narratives we tell ourselves, as opposed to like just synapses in the brain. But I found my way to do my master's because people believed in me. There were two professors. One of them, her name is Randa Farah. She's Palestinian. She gave me like a 96, and I don't get those grades, because she was like, no, you're really smart and you're insightful, and I see something in you, apply for your master's. And I was like, are you out of your mind? Like, I'm not.
What was the course or program you got?
It was about Palestinian culture. Yeah. And I talked about the veil, and I talked about, like, why are we so obsessed with the veil? And it was like looking at things in both sides. And
I'd love to read this if it's still around.
And this other guy, Dr. Douglas Drosdale St. Christensen, he was the first gay man who got legally married in Canada. He allowed,
that's a very long name.
Yes, he allowed me to be free. He was like, Umbereen, what do you want to do? Because I approached him. That's the other thing I do. I just go to people and say, hey, I really want to work with you. I don't really know what. So he came up to me and he's
like someone else I know.
Yeah, exactly. So he said to me, he goes, what are you interested in? And I said, food, art, culture. He said, let's do that. So him and I would study food and culture and be like, okay, why do we use sugar to talk about love? What is the significance about food?
Very good question.
Yeah, and like, why aren't men allowed to be in the household, but yet most chefs are men? Like, just this interesting analysis on food and gender and these norms, and where does that even come from? How does that happen? And then for my last course, I remember cooking him a chicken curry meal. I was like, this is my final exam, and he loved it. He gave me like a 99%.
I love this story.
So that put my average way high, and I got into the Dean's honors list, which is so funny. For those two courses, yes. But yeah, like Palestinian women.
I'm dumbing it down, but there's a lot more to it than just making chicken curry.
I have no idea how, but I ended up, with a really high degree, like honors, and then that got me into my master's. Otherwise, I had no chance. But I didn't do it. I trusted my gut, because I got into doing anthropology in Concordia, and I was like, I don't know, it just felt wrong. And so I called them and I deferred it. And during that time, I started working at Harbourfront Center because I was such a hardy volunteer. They offered me a job in doing programming assistance.
Right.
So that's where I started to learn how to program. It was at Harbourfront. And in Harbourfront, if you show initiative, you can do anything. So
they'll help build you.
Yes, but you have to be able to do anything. So I remember doing dishes. I remember chopping food for chefs. I remember teaching dance classes when people were sick. I remember going to Tap Fong and buying literally cutting boards. I remember leading parades, and I remember someone actually got sick. She took a job at the City of Toronto, and they actually doing Nuit Blanche at the time when it was early. They were like, do you want to take over her role? And I was like, sure, what is it? And they're like, East Coast. I was like, what the fuck? I don't know anything about East Coast. But there you go. I started learning. I was like, okay, we're going to do oyster shucking, and we're going to learn about Celtic music. But to me, it was so fascinating. And
you're also feeding your soul because you're learning.
I'm learning
cultural art.
Yes.
That you don't know.
Yes. I was constantly.
So did it seem like work to you at that time?
No, but it was tough because it's like you're not doing glamorous things.
Sure.
No, I loved it.
But I don't think that's what ever stopped you. I don't think that was your drive. This is I want only because it's glam.
No,
I want something that I'm gonna gain from, learn from, that's going to focus on these areas that I have interest in.
Yeah. And I remember, I think I made like very, very, very little. You know, I lived in Scarborough. I was taking the subway to Harbourfront like every single day. I worked the latest, but that's how I learned. And then during that time, me and my friends produced the Vagina Monologues in Toronto.
Oh, wow.
And so that was a pretty big show because I was also working. I had like 40,000 jobs, by the way. I was working at Tourism Toronto and I just cold called them. So while I was at Harbourfront doing an internship, I picked up the phone, called Tourism Toronto and said, "Are you hiring?" And they were like, "We are." So I got a job in their call center to being an ambassador for Toronto. So that's how I learned about theaters. I learned about hotels. I learned about restaurants. I learned about attractions. I learned about like everything. So, when we did our version of Vagina Monologues in Toronto, we did it at the St. Lawrence Centre for the Arts because I was like, we need to do it in a big ass theater. We raised our own money. Like we did so much fundraising to pay for that venue, which was like $10,000. And then what I learned a lot from was the person I was working with. She was doing a course in media and marketing, and that goes to branding. And she said, like, you know, we need, you know, media partnerships. We need larger personalities, people from radio. And I didn't get it in the first. I was like, why? Yeah. But then I started to realize that seats started to sell. Once I did that, and we decided to give the money to a women's shelter. Like we workshopped all these shelters. We found one called Juliet's Place, and it was this woman who was murdered by her husband. Somebody created a shelter out of her name, Juliet's Place, and so we spent time there. And when we were struggling selling tickets, and when we had these headliners, sales started going up, and sales started going up. I started to realize there's a magic formula here.
Sure, yeah, there's a correlation.
Yes, and how you need your local community of actors, but you need larger names, fancier theater. Anchor. Yes. Anchor, right? And, we brought in Trey Anthony, and we sort of gave her this award because she did the kink in my hair. So two people who really inspired me growing up was Eve Ensler and Trey Anthony. Eve Ensler for Vagina Monologues, Trey Anthony for kink in my hair, because what she did was she wrote these cultural stories for Black people, women, youth, men. So when Trey Anthony came, we sold out and we raised $14,000 in one night, and we handed that check to the women's shelter. And that's the day I got my acceptance to U of T. So I randomly applied to U of T to do my master's in social work. And I got in. And in my life, I always do things and I'm like, fuck, what did I do that for?
Yeah.
So randomly...
Now you got your acceptance, like, now I got to actually do this.
And now I actually have to do this. So whenever I have an idea and it comes out of nowhere, I always follow it.
Right.
So because I know it's not for me. Yeah. So it's the same idea that told me don't go to Concordia. I listened to that. And then I decided to stay back and produce my own show. That's the day I got into U of T. I went to U of T. And I didn't say that I loved U of T. I wouldn't say that. It was very cool in the sense that I learned a lot. But I wanted to be in the streets and doing protests. And that's more like York and Ryerson. U of T is more clinical. But what U of T has is a key to the city. Once you have U of T, my
network that you get from
and the accolades, right? Like I have a master's from U of T, and again, I did this all on student loans. So that's the other thing to know. Like I'm completely self-made, and I hope people, feel like they can do what I did too.
It makes a big difference to yourself, and then even the type of work you do.
Mm-hmm.
That impact is very different when you have been extremely broke. When you have been borrowing money from like whether it's the government or your friends or whatever.
Yeah.
Like in my case, I never really went to the government. I did it in other ways.
Yeah.
When you are doing that, you push yourself harder, but what you achieve has so much more impact because
you have a different level of appreciation for it because it's you've worked for that,
truly worked for it.
And I have to remind myself of that too sometimes when you have flashbacks of like, oh, I didn't have this luxury, and then I actually follow that narrative in my head. I actually did that the other day. I was like, oh, but if you had this luxury and you live this life, you may not have had that authenticity that you do, and that's how I connect to artists to this day. So I literally went through that and I was like, no, so glad I didn't have that. And
let's talk about how real that is in your world in terms of working with the folks that you work with and the types of connections you've made. Because there's a lot of, whether it's in fashion or arts or music or in theater or acting, like you hear the whole thing about people being fake and being, a certain way just because you're supposed to be, or that's what's expected, or you're on camera and that's who you should be. But talk about authenticity in the world you're in and the people that you work with.
Oh, it's huge. I mean, in visual art, there is no, unless you're super, 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 super pop artists, you cannot be fake. Like the visual art world has zero tolerance. Like I even had to change my look for a while. I was like, shit, I better wear my thick black glasses and like just go like straight Yoko Ono style. I did that for years because I was like, no, I want to be taken seriously as, you know, somebody who
In your craft.
yeah, sees the depth. You have to have that depth. If you don't, people don't feel the artwork, because like, there's so many artworks that you see and you just keep going.
Yeah.
For me, I'm always interested in artwork that stops you in your tracks, and that is made from like pure authenticity.
Right. And I think it also comes out, like, I mean, you and I have had a few conversations, but it comes out when you speak to, and I think that's what people find with you is that's where, like, your professors and and the people that have mentored you and saw that spark, it's because they can hear it coming from you. It's genuine, like in everyday conversation, and even just speaking about life.
See, and that's so different in our world, right?
Night and day. That's why I asked that.
Right? That's so different, because even from a fashion perspective, when you like go on set or when like so the first time we met, I was coming from some volunteer work. I had my like volunteer t-shirt on, my hair was a mess, like no makeup. I had these like ratchet Uggs on, like running around the city. And he knew me through a common friend who was like, oh, like she's a planner and a stylist type of thing. So I show up, and I'm pretty sure in his head he was going like, how is this girl like a stylist? Like, look at her. She looks like a freaking mess right now. And she looks like
Which is most of the time. I would say 95% of the
That's
time.
good. It
She
means
looks
you're
like a
an
mess.
artist. Hot mess.
hot mess.
mess.
That's what I call
all
it.
the time. I will like,
I'll give it just
bruise
the mess
myself.
part.
Hey. and then when we were like on, and then you see me working on set and stuff like that, and I'll still show up like really like, you know, black jeans, t-shirt, hat, sneakers, and get my stuff done. But I've had people with the first time I'm working with them, they actually want me to be all glammed up, and then they take me seriously. Oh, okay, you know how to put yourself
Interesting.
together. That means you must know what you're doing. And then many times I'm like, I have no fucking clue what I'm doing. I have no clue what I'm doing, but I know I want to do this. I just want to do that. And I just want to create and like see stuff.
Well, you're almost like 10 steps ahead, because, you know, if you look at high level hairstylists, they were all black and they're very simple. If you look at big time curators, like look at the curator of the Guggenheim, like they're wearing all black and they're very simple. So you've hit the artist sort of realm of like, I don't need to try. I'm authentic. That's what I do too.
I think that's also because I used to read so many biographies growing up. And I was a huge loner. Like, people don't believe that, but they're like, oh, you're so social. But I'm social, like my job requires me.
Yeah.
My life requires that.
Yeah.
But I was like that kid who was bullied, kind of went through a similar path that you did, except that I didn't have that whole like mentors and like awareness. I was pretty much like by myself.
Yeah, that's hard.
So my friends were my butts. Like I was always
That's awesome. Yeah.
So that's why I learned all these different things.
Amazing.
Because I was always learning that.
Amazing.
And I remember Steve Jobs being like, I don't have time to figure out what I need to wear. My mind is running so fast. So he used to have
He's always wearing the same outfit, the black.
and but he had like, you know, 12, let's say, black shirts and jeans, and he would just wear that.
Recycle them every day.
That's it. And that's how he had, like, he would like free up that brain power that they say and put it in his work. And there are a lot of people like that. So it's like, if I can do that and not worry about how I look, then maybe I have a chance of being better at what I want to do. Even if I still didn't know exactly what
That's
I want
cool. Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break right there and come back.
Hey guys, we're taking a quick break just to remind you where you can find our podcast online.
You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Tunes,
Apple Music, but you know what, you call it Apple Tunes.
whatever.
Right. You can also find us on TuneIn, on Google Play, and of course Instagram when we do it the first Tuesday of every month.
And Facebook, here and there.
Here and there.
Here and there.
So thanks for tuning in, and now back to our podcast.
But in your world, it's also a little bit different, because I think that perception is reality in terms of if you're walking around looking a certain way, but you're expected to be the stylist or the person that's putting together the folks on set, there's a bit of the, well, if she can't do it for herself, how is she going to do this for somebody else? And it's unfortunate. It doesn't mean you can't do the work,
Right.
But that perception automatically kicks into someone's head.
Yeah, and so there have been times where I've had to quote unquote dress up, but even that dressing up is kind of like what I have on today. Like a black jean and just a fun t-shirt, some accessories, and that's it. But then once they start working with me again, they see me show up with like sneakers, jeans.
Yeah, you want to be comfortable, so because you're working. I mean, you're in there just like Umbereen said, like you're in there doing your thing. Like you're getting down and dirty. You're actually making things happen.
You get so focused.
Well, the biggest thing you need to wear is your confidence.
Exactly, and it comes out in conversation.
Yeah,
right?
That's what you need.
Yeah, so.
Once they see you're a boss, they don't care. They don't care what you wear.
Well, that's just it. So you built the theater show did extremely well, which is congratulations. That's great to hear.
Thanks.
A first time production.
I was like 21.
Oh, sorry, your first one was at 12.
Well, then I wrote Mary Kahani, which was like this whole other life I had before.
Okay. Tell us about that.
So I did my master's at U of T, and I, of course, being how I am, super rebellious, I found my own internships, and I went to Women's College Hospital. And I remember I was rejected from like every other person I interviewed with, because they would assign me things like Sunnybrook Hospital, and I'd be like, okay, so I know people have cancer, but I'm gonna write their story, and so I'm gonna bring a book. And they're like, you're good, but we don't know how to fit you into our box.
Yeah.
So,
Very familiar.
So they're defining social work essentially.
yeah, I was just sort of, doing my own thing. And I read this book. I did an interview with someone, the very last one. It was before my birthday too, actually, which is coming up. I think it was on December 21st.
I remember you celebrated it last year.
Yeah.
Did you say, I think this is my birthday?
No, it's like, when I met this woman.
Oh, okay.
So I did this interview at Women's College Hospital, and I remember her saying to me, she actually had a theater background too, and she said, Umbereen, like, look, you need to be the social worker you want to be. Just get your degree, and that'll be your ticket. And I was like, yes, I love you. So I got my internship with her. She gave me a book called Radical Feminist Therapy. I read that book. called from Bonnie Burstow. I Googled her. It turns out she was teaching at OISE, which is the student teachers college at U of T. So I begged her to take her course of working with survivors of trauma. And I remember she interviewed me to take the course. You had to sit on your hands like this because she thought that she had like a kind of like a nervous tic. So if you spoke with your hands, it would drive her crazy. So I remember her sitting on my hands and she was like, why do you want to take the course? I'm like, because I want to learn how to work with trauma, like the real stuff. I don't want to do like U of T, like shout out to U of T, but a lot of their stuff is clinical and a lot of it is hospital based, which is great. And a lot of it is like CAMH focused and
right.
Which is what, you know, amazing. They
yes.
need that.
Yes.
I just was looking for something more liberal
different.
in the field. So I wanted to work with trauma survivors. So she made me sit on my hands and she was like, you can't take this course if you're trying to fix yourself. You have to take this course if you genuinely want to work with other people. So that authenticity, I have been interviewed, you know, to make sure that I'm authentic
right.
over and over and over and over up until this day, you know? So I just did a TED Talk and I spent 3 months in that process, you know, coming to this authentic story. So it's all, you know, part of my journey on authenticity. But I took this course with her and this woman lied on the couch. She's hilarious. She would lie in the middle of the room and she would be like, ask me questions. And we would have to ask her therapy questions. And she had this cowbell that she would ring for us. Like she was so eccentric and phenomenal. And she said to me, the class, make a tool that's creative that you can use for survivors of trauma. So I was like, I'm going to write a play. Just like my heroes, Trey Anthony and Eve Ensler. So this other girl sitting across the table said the same thing and she read the same book. So we paired up and we wrote what I called Mary Kahani, which means my story. So I went around with my partner and we interviewed all these people like South Asian Women's Center, Alliance for South Asian AIDS Prevention, like Besharam, like Zavari, all of the key players at the time. And they were so open to interviewing with me. Right. Like, contrary to what we believe in our culture, they were totally
people
open.
That want to talk about it.
Totally. Everybody did. Yeah. You know, like Uzma Shakir was working at like the legal clinic for South Asians. And she, like, everybody talked to me. And so we took those narratives and we wrote stories. And basically, because my whole life and the way I practice and everybody around me is storytelling. That's essentially what we all do, whether that's fashion, music, design, art. It's all stories. So we wrote a play, Mary Kahani, and there was a bunch of different stories. And, you know, I graduated from U of T, and one of the people asked me to produce the show. So I produced a show, and that person had a PR background. Again, taught me a lot about branding,
Right.
because she sent out a press release, and all this media showed up. So I think I was like 22 years old, and like, you know, CBC showed up, Toronto Star showed up. You know, I think it was a National Post showed up. So they came, and they like literally after my play, because it was so provocative, and it was pretty provocative. I have an audiobook out of the show, so of the play, so
We can send we can post it.
I'll send it to you. Yeah. It's funny because, you know, there's Me Too, and, you know, there's feminism of now, which is amazing, and I'm so happy. But I was doing it like in, you know, 2003.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, I was alone. It was like me and my cast, and each of them, like Mira, who, you know, she's a major interviewer of Fuchsia, and she's on Cultured.
Yeah.
She's in my cast. Nadia Shah, she's a major astrologer, Desi woman. She's in my cast. Mandeep Kaur, she's like a major professor, you know, in BC. Asha Masuri, she's like, I'm sure you know her. She does like amazing teaching, and so we were pioneers in the game back then. And I would honestly say that in a really positive way. Like Zavari was in my play.
Yeah.
Jasmine Savant, who has her own theater company. So it's really cool to see it's growing now. But I remember nobody talked about it when we were talking about it.
Back then it was
nobody.
And I think what's really cool is that you're so focused on creating something and yet having an impact that at that time, that's where your mind is, while not realizing the ripple effect of what you're doing.
Oh yeah, we had no clue what we were doing. I had no clue. And that's still true to this day. I mean, I know a little bit, but I jump into things all the time being like, okay, I just have to figure this out now. And if it's scary, then it means you have to do it.
Yes.
So long story short, after the show, I got all this press. So, you know, like literally like a huge spread in Toronto Star. I was on CBC like, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, interviewed by Suhana Marchette, and I was very, very young. So that kind of put me on, you know, in the scene, and I started working 4 or 5 jobs because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Alliance for South Asian AIDS Prevention, I love that. Or they came up to me and said, we want you to be our publicist. I was like, I'm not a publicist, I'm a social worker. They're like, you just get all this media, you know what you're doing. I'm like, all right. So I Googled how to be a publicist, and I had to write literally, yes. But when I got there, one thing I learned real quick, when I pitched media, they were like, what's the story? Okay, someone has HIV, that's not a story. And I was like, oh my God, I better get the story. And I was like, okay, we're going to talk about...
Which is your forte?
I think so. And everybody who I work with, I realized, okay, then we took the angle like newcomer women, like HIV was on the rise. Then we got the media. Right. You know, and like when we did events, I started introducing things that were more fun. Like, so I did this thing with, you know, I called it like stimulation, but it was like fashion, music, art. We took people who had HIV. I gave them cameras. I was like, go take photos from your perspective. We did all, I just decided to flip the script because there was so much joy there.
Yeah.
Right. I was like, I understand we need candlelight vigils and we need the stuff, but our culture is fucking booming.
Yeah.
So I got them to do all these crazy things. And then I got a job working in elder abuse, which was tough. Like this straight up like health organization approached me because they read about me and they said, do you want this job? I said, sure. So I tried it, and that was really hard to go into Thorncliffe. That's where it was. Right. And talk about elder abuse, like was not happening. No one was talking to me. Everybody was a smiley. The only ones to talk to my smiley friend, coworker, Marion Punja, who wrote the play with me. And I was like, okay, I need to learn how to fix this. So what I realized, that people wanted to speak English because they were all Desi people. So they're not going to talk about your cultural issues. So I created an English speaking group, and I brought them in saying, all right, here you're going to practice your English. First I had like, you know, samosas out there. They wouldn't eat the samosas. Then I brought like cheese and crackers. They wouldn't eat the cheese and crackers. Like I got so fat during that time, just trying all the different foods.
Because you were eating everything yourself.
Yeah, I was eating. Then when I started making chai, they drank the chai.
Right.
So
that was the kicker.
Exactly. I was like, okay, everybody's health conscious here. They're not eating cheese. So doing these English speaking groups, I created a game. So pull a scenario out of a bottle, and in those scenarios, I started writing things about abuse.
Right.
What do you do if so and so? I wrote little stories, and so I was doing that. I was working at ASAP, running around like a maniac, selling like bamboos, like TTC, and all kinds of stuff. And I got a job in public health. And like, you're never gonna believe this, in the sexual health counseling HIV phone line. So I'm on the phone counseling people about, where can you go get tested for HIV? Right. Where are the shelters in the, in Toronto? What happens if you're exposed to something? It's all anonymous. So I was counseling people. Mm-hmm. And while I was there, the job came up for special events. And I looked at that and I was like, there's no way I can do this job. Like, no way. Like, it was this yay long, expectation. And, I just didn't think I was qualified. And Nuit Blanche was so new back then. I was sitting beside someone who said to me, like, I think you need to apply. And I was like, why? She's like, you have a resume that's functional. It's called a functional resume. It doesn't flow like a regular resume. Mm-hmm. What you're going to do is organize it this way in different chunks and make a portfolio. So I said, all right. And I applied. And then I got the interview and I did exactly that. I remember walking to Staples, photocopying my articles, like burning disc CDs of me on CBC, thinking I was in like Masala Mehndi Masti a couple of years. No one was at my show, like, because it was all about like abuse. One show sold out at Harbourfront, but other than that, I was like, anyways, I printed out those, pamphlets, and I went for the interview. I was like the second person there, and I remember them saying to me, like, what do you know about contemporary art? And I said, nothing. I said, I don't know anything about contemporary art. I said, but I know that art is therapy. Yeah. And I said, people are using art to heal themselves, express themselves, tell a story, make a statement. And I honestly, I still believe that to this day. And so they gave me the job, which was nuts. I think I beat out like 500 people. And amazing. I was
you also came at it from a different angle.
Yeah. I was like, I understand the psychological effect of it, and I understand community, and because I am it.
Right.
And
that's the best way, like, you are it.
Yeah. And so I was like freaking out because I was like, what the hell did I just do? Again, yes.
What am I going to do with this?
What am I doing? I'm like an established kind of social worker. I could have gone down the route of being on CBC and like being in journalism all the time. And, I remember thinking, should I do that? And should I be this mouthpiece of culture? And then I thought, I don't know. And then, I was pretty respected, I would say, in a certain angle. And I came to City Hall and I was at the bottom of the barrel. And that was really hard. It was hard. Like, I totally stood out. I was not back in school again. Like, I was a brown girl from Scarborough in a contemporary art field, and everybody was doing like pyro and, huge actors on stilts and like Winterlicious and Summerlicious and concerts like on massive scales. And Nuit was so new. And I was like, oh my God, I was terrified. But I don't know. I did well because I wasn't from the art world.
Right.
And that's the thing, right?
Yeah. I wasn't from the art world. I looked exactly. I just looked at people like, okay, these are people telling stories. These are people using art as therapy, and I would just ask them that. Okay, what's your story? What are you trying to say? And I found that because I didn't know who they were, it helped me get like more success because I gave them my honest opinion, or I would be truly like honest with like, okay, this is a good venue or this is not a good venue, and we would go on this journey together to tell the story using the city of Toronto as a canvas.
And I think from what I know of you, and now that we've also like met and stuff, you have a knack of making people feel at ease, so they open up and they start sharing their experiences with you, which it's very rare, especially in our generation today, when everyone's trying to be all cool and closed up.
Do you think so? Do you don't think people share like all the time now?
No.
Really?
They share
some groups, so you'll find it's segmented. It's not everywhere yet. I mean, so I come from a corporate world, and it's not like everybody's sheltered. Everyone has the wall up. Everyone is trying to be a certain way or act a certain way or what you're supposed to be in that role. There's the authenticity, as you mentioned, is missing.
But that I find is not only just in your world. I think
even in the fashion world, I think there's a big issue with that.
Fashion, yes, but again, like for me, I wouldn't say I'm one of those like Anna Wintour type like fashionistas, but I'm one of those who again tries to tell their like it's almost like I'm telling a story through fashion. That's the way I look at things. And I just like all the random stuff that I end up like falling into. But I find that just even in any world, it's very rare to find real people. And I think it's been one of my biggest conversation pieces all throughout this year on the podcast and off the podcast, where, I mean, I come from a city where we were always open and we always had conversations. So for me, coming from Montreal to here was a huge shock, where everyone's walls are up and everyone's so like cliquey and secretive and guarded, and then they all think that I'm the weird one because I'm like, oh, like, we should talk about this, and they're like, well, we don't talk about that. And I'm like, well, why?
Isn't it like a young person generation? What don't they talk like Generation Y?
I think so. Again, I think you're right. I think the younger generation is a little bit more open.
Yeah,
and they're a little bit more.
Maybe
everything is a vlog, and
Yeah, everything's discussed. Everyone's more on that, but that because now again, I think you have to look at what's cool. That's cool now.
That's
true.
Cool now.
And it wasn't cool. We grew up in an era where that wasn't.
Oh,
cool.
100%.
You're regarded as the oddball
100%.
or the weirdo or whatever you want to call it.
Totally, yeah.
Or you bullied, like because you were trying to be normal. And have conversations and talk about real
and
things.
stuff that people do not want to talk about back then, right? And then now so when you say that people are open, quote unquote, today, they're open about what? The fake stuff still, right? Like if you really, really take a moment and look at these vlogs and these Instagram stories, what's the purpose behind it? Are they trying to get those followers? Are they trying to sell products? Are they just trying to be famous right now? Because for them, it's almost like they're trying to be real without really being real. So I feel like for me, that world is still very fake. It's not this. It's not just like sitting and having a conversation and
it may be, but it's not openly in a lot of cases. But I do think the younger generation, as much as there's a lot of the fakeness with being
it's better than
but it's more open. Like there are people doing vlogs and that sort of thing that are out there and really opening up. Sometimes maybe it's good or bad. It depends on how the impact is on them. But to me, it's a good way to get therapy out. Like it's talking about situations, issues, challenges. It's good because it's therapeutic. You bottle it up, you keep it inside, and that's a big problem.
Totally.
Because it's going to come out in other ways, right?
Yeah.
Well, I find that the younger generation is a lot of like social